Deixa eu ver aqui. Funcionou.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final segment of this three-part poetry series organized by the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, which has featured British-born Barbadian poet Safia Kamaria Kinshasa. My name is Harriet Pierce, and I am the librarian here at the museum and the organizer of this three-part series. In part one, Safia facilitated an online workshop entitled Freeing the Writer Within. Part two was a masterclass, Writing into History. Unfortunately, this session came to an abrupt end because of internet problems with which were experienced by our provider and affected us. We apologize for this break in transmission. But all is not lost. Remember that Safia has offered to critique any completed poems that came out of the workshop and the masterclass exercises. We have already received some poems, but just send your completed work to me at library@barbmuse.org.bb. So we look forward to receiving those completed poems. Today, in the series finale, our poet laureate, Miss Esther Phillips, and visiting poet Safia Kinshasa will sit down with Michelle Hickson Cox, who is a poet in her own right, to talk what else but poetry. But I will let Michelle tell you more about this session. Michelle?
Thank you, Harriet, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm a little bit humbled, Harriet, because I don't think of myself just yet as a poet anywhere near the standard of these two ladies. I now start, as they say. So I have quite a ways to go, I think, before I get to their level. But it really is a pleasure to be able to facilitate this conversation this afternoon. It's not about me, so I'm not going to talk too much. I just want us to begin by let's hearing a little bit more about who is Safia, who is Esther. So we just want to kind of get a sense of your work, your journey into becoming the poets that you are. So I'll just launch right into it. And Esther, as our poet laureate, I'll ask you if you can begin.
Certainly, I started writing poetry a very long time ago. Well, I suppose my past would have to be a very long time ago. And it's something I always loved. I remember I always liked reading, always liked, nature. In fact, I have a poem I'd probably start with to, where I lay out, in a sense, the early beginnings of my sense of poetry. And I came through school loving poetry. My first published poem was actually in the BIM magazine. It's a long time ago as well. And then I continued writing. Now I've published When Ground Doves Fly, that's Ian Randall Publishers. Then there's the Leaving Atlantis, The Stone Gatherer, and the last one is Witnessing Stone. But the journey has been a wonderful one of change, of course, one of struggle, one always evolves, of course. So I wondered if I could read this poem, which would in a way answer that question.
Absolutely.
Yes, and this one is called Jack's Hall. And I particularly want to read that because that's a very topical thing right now. Because I want to show the extent to which we can start out in a place of innocence and then evolve to a greater awareness. Jack's Hall. I must have learned, aged 8 or 9, to love the dawn, walking skillet in hand to fetch the milk from Jack's Hall yard, where our grandfather kept his cows. Chilly mornings, hedgerows drenched in dew, yellow creeping back into early late flowers, purple peering out from bird vine leaves clustered in the cut rock at both sides of the road. Smell of plums, ripe guavas bursting from the gully, filling up the air. Once I'd passed the broken down mill at Waterman Straw. The wide sky walked with me, pink, gray, lilac, so soft I hardly dared to breathe, though I scarcely knew why. But something was in that quietness, something blackbirds and sparrows knew but kept their silence. It was in the insistent song of crickets and grasshoppers, the whisper of cuss-cuss as the wind slipped through, clouds noiseless, shifting shape at will, or my creation. This was the beginning of poetry. This searching for the prism hidden in the dark, ear tuned to the pulse, the rise and fall of the undergrowth, more telling than the noise around us. How could I have known my muse walked with me all the way to Jack's Hall Yard, those early mornings, when the dawn was itself my first poem. So that's pretty much it, the love of nature, the consciousness of, that is what triggered my earliest appreciation of anything called poetry.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Safia, I think you and I might be a little bit more close in age. I kind of sit sometimes and listen to the elders talk about their journey. And it's always fascinating to me because some of our experiences are quite similar. They're sure, this is 2021 going into 22. And some people who've been writing from the 60s and 70s consider in the post-independent era, we're now post-republic now. How do you think in terms of your own journey, is there anything from what, Esther would have shared just now that you think also kind of speaks to you in terms of your development as a poet?
I think that as a poet, I'm always asking questions about where I can situate myself between the older generation and the younger generation as well. So I'm always constantly reading people who came before me. And by the way, it's an honor to be here, absolutely. And I think that when I read Esther's work, I feel as though I am on a journey with Esther. The pacing is always majestic, and there is a sense of timelessness as well. So I don't necessarily feel it's an interesting thing. It's like there's this intersectional time warp happening. I feel like I am a part of history, but also the work which is being offered still feels very present. I think that especially during the pandemic, a lot of us, having to spend so much time by ourselves and in nature. I mean, and during the pandemic, I was in England. People were really getting back to nature. So I think that even again, it's almost this cycle happening. So I do very much resonate. Yes.
I heard you telling a story, Safia, about where you started your journey in poetry. I don't know if you want to share with the audience.
Yes.
Your happening upon poetry.
My happening upon poetry, yes. So I actually, next year will be my 5th year in poetry. I have not been doing it for very long. I was a dancer and an academic. I don't like to say a dancer and an academic. I think dance is a very intellectual activity. So I do not like to split the two, but yes, so African Caribbean dance is my specialty, and cultural studies. I always wanted a bridge to bring the two together because I never wanted to stop writing. I never wanted to stop dancing, and I was in there was a cafe, and there was a show going on, and some friends wanted me to perform because it was a poetry event. One of the poets did not show up, so the host asked if there were any poets in the audience, anybody who because if you go to a poetry event, usually there is a writer in the audience too. my friend said, "Oh, Safia, you right? Why don't you go up and do some poetry?" And I said, "Well, if I do that, then you have to buy me a hot chocolate, right? That's what you have to do." So I went to on the stage. I did a freestyle because I did not have any of my work with me. I said, "Okay, it is what it is. No one is expecting me to be stellar." Next thing I know, the host says, "Now give us your scores," and I find out it's a slam competition. It's yes, so they hold up their scores, and I managed to get through to the next round, but I had no more and nothing else in me. I was quite shocked. And the host said, "You should do this you should do this professionally. You should try this out." And I said to the host, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a poet. I don't. I have no idea what that means. And if I do something, I have to do it at 100%. That's just my nature. And next thing I know, so the next year, I actually do decide to take poetry seriously, and I went on to win the entire competition, national championships, blah blah blah. Yeah, I think I became the first person to do that, to win everything that I entered, and then came the notion of bringing dance and poetry together on the page and performatively, on stage as well. So yes, so that's
So I'm going to stick a pin there and just let everyone know, those of you who are joining us on Facebook, or if you're here with us on Zoom, please feel free to put your comments, your questions in the chat. This is a conversation, so we're not waiting until the very, very end to take questions and comments. We are happy to incorporate them. Those of you who are on Zoom, if you would like to join the conversation at any point in time, just raise your hand and we will be happy to have you come on with us for a moment. So I want to get back to this question of dance and music, because Safia, you talk a lot about the incorporation of dance in your work, and Esther, there's a musicality that just resonates throughout your pieces as well. How important is it to have, as poets, that kind of appreciation for other art forms, and then to be influenced by those art forms when we're actually doing or writing?
I think, as Safia mentioned before, I think it is a false delineation when we insist on putting these things in different categories. All art really combines to produce what looks like different sections of it. But there's always that underlying factor. There's always that underlying unity, I believe, in all art. I have a piece there, but I prefer to let my poetry speak for me. And during the ash fall, for example, as Safia mentioned, whenever disasters strike or these very unfortunate things, they give us that space and time. We can't do anything else. So we write. And I have this poem here called Mountain. And it does have something of that musicality. In fact, it does address the idea of music. And you'll see what I mean. And I will be mentioning some names in here. Safia might not be familiar with them, but you would be for sure. So this is called Mountain. And again, this was during the ash fall. Mountain. He said to me, no, this is, my brother had thrown up this challenge, okay? He said to me, "You're a poet. Make these days brighter. Turn the world into glass. Give us your seer's eyes to see the red bougainvillea flower again, the green of palm trees under gray volcanic ash, that for all its birthing from fury and fire, reminds us of what we will become. Call out your muse now, that ancient figure who spans the earth and sky, all times and seasons, so she may counsel and inspire." And so, under the stained glass windows of the St. Michael's Cathedral, an Easter Sunday, while the pipe organ stands in awed silence, the Nicholas Branca band is a study in plasticity, hands, bodies in motion, infusion, steel pan, piano, violin, guitar, trumpet, trombone, drum, saxophone. Beethoven's Fury Elise romps with Kitchener's Pan in A minor. Beautiful, beautiful Barbados glides through Bach's Prelude in C. A grandmother hums under Branker's bass guitar, the king of love my shepherd is, whose goodness faileth never. And our Mahalia sings us, reggae style, over another mountain. We'll walk it out 1,000 times if need be. We'll walk it out. So here it is that I'm capturing this moment in music. There's the muse. Interestingly enough, this is the muse one associates with poetry, in particular in this instance. But the muse is answering the question, answering the challenge by taking us to music. All right? And at the same time, you see how the music is combined with the poetry, is combined with the lyrics of the song. And of course, I use a term in there which I had only recently become familiar with. That's the term plasticity. And that is the motion of the bodies where something in them is moving to the music is something. And I see, by the way, some of that, I see that component in some of Safia's work. That ability she has to create motion, which she knows, which of course is dance, to create motion, but that happens also in the structures of her poetry, as far as a loose kind of structure, but at the same time is attempting to bind certain ideas and certain concepts together to form something rhythmic. So yes, it's a fascinating thing, actually, the whole idea of crafting the poem and capturing so much that poetry is all about. And art, of course.
Yeah, Safia, talk to us about the dance elements of it, because I think for some people it may be easy to understand the musicality of the poetry because it's spoken and music can be sung. But when you think of dance and its movement, that may be a little bit more difficult for some people to quite grasp the combination of the two. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yes, so I found form very difficult to learn in poetry. So we have 110 forms of poetry and growing and techniques, etc. I saw form as a form of choreography, and that made it easier for me to understand. So a sonnet, so iambic pentameter, da 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 da. I began to step with my feet and try to embody poetry as well as write it, and this enabled me to remember and to also when I started. I would literally weave words with my hands. So what I'm literally doing, and I would try to physically figure out how I could get this onto the page. This then led me to led me to the attempts of creating my own technique. I'm going to probably, this would be a good time to share the screen and share some of my work and show you a breakthrough I recently had. Actually, I'm going to, okay, so what you're seeing is what is the beginning of what I will be referring to as a Barbadian wheel, where I'm literally watching. So it's not just poetry turning into dance. Sometimes I'm right now, I'm turning dance into movement. So I'm studying the dances and movements of Barbadian women in particular for my first collection, and looking at intergenerational movements, how grands would move and young women, and yes, so I'll talk more about this later. But so what you're seeing here is dance notation, but graphic, a very graphic version. So this circular thing is something that I've created. I'll go back to this later on in our conversations, but just to show you how my mind basically works. So this Now we're seeing something which is a little more traditional for dance notation. So if I would think of this as, so maybe this would be a, let's see, a step. And I would do a few steps here, 3 steps to the right, 3 steps to the left, through my arm back and forth. Hopefully you can see my cursor, but the swinging of the hips and, you know, and jumps. And this is how I would literally write, how I do write my poetry. It starts as a dance. And I think that the poetry that I did grow up on, West Indian, most or all the West Indian poetry in my house, there was this natural sense of rhythm anyway, right? There was always some type of movement, and growing up, of course, on calypso, so it was within me. So I wanted to figure out how to put it on the page. I'm going to read a poem which I think speaks to this sense of musicality. It's called I Tied My Teeth to My Feet and Ate My Own Testament. A man broke my godmother's jaw with head lice. She turned into sweet grass and goat skin. I wrapped my fingers in my stomach stuffed in a bucket. Got better at sacrificing things. My hands hung in Porter's stable, wore cornrows and creoles, so no one noticed my eyes were inside out. Even my family never knew which way to bury me. I will forget. I will remember my family who did not know in which direction to hug. My neck skipped alongside a double-decker. I wore deep wave and perm, tossed pop music across Cholton Park, became brilliant at stealing myself. Unzipped my tracksuit, pickpocketed my brain. The rest of my mouth is stored in a sack of yam. Breaks apart the mother I break. Okay. So there, I would also have the change in accents as well. My accent is naturally very hybrid. So yes, there we go.
Safia, I want to pick up on something that you said. And I want to put it to both of you. I know my answer for myself because it's something that's very important to me as well as a writer. This idea of how to put it on the page. How important is it for you both to, you know, that arrangement of the words on the page, the visual arrangement, which for me, I see it as another side of the expression being, you know, the artistic arrangement of the words visually. But how critical is that for you? Because we can talk about the musicality, we can talk about the elements of movement, but what about that visual placement? And I'm kind of asking this question too, because I had a situation where someone published one of my poems and completely switched up the way that I had it laid out. And, you know, as a young writer, I was like, what are you doing? You know, I didn't have the confidence at the time to say, no, this is how it's supposed to be written. I did it like this for a reason. But from your perspectives as two ladies who have been quite significantly published and have been working, you know, quite a bit in this area, what is the significance of the placement of those words where you break the stanza or break the line or choose to put a comma or a full stop? What's the significance?
I think it's extremely important for me. It certainly is. You know, I have this discussion with my publisher. Well, he doesn't change anything now. It's never been a big issue, but for sure, I would insist that my line breaks go where I believe they should go, because I think it's extremely important. You know, where you pause on the page, very often I have run-on lines, but I'm very conscious of meter. The musicality you hear has a lot to do with meter. I'm conscious of meter. There is a particular beat I'm attempting to put out there, and where I stop that line matters. Now, I taught Shakespeare for many, many years, so I'm familiar with the idea of the run-on line, but still within that line, you still have to have, even though you're running the line on, there must still be the sense of meter. So I'm very conscious of rhythm, and I feel it has a lot to do with where that line breaks on the page. There are times when, and as I read, well, Safi could speak for herself. But I noticed that her line arrangements are very, very different, but that could have a lot to do with the choreography going on in her own head and how she wants it expressed. So she can speak to that. Safia?
Yeah, I wanted to know. I was just so happy to hear notes about my work. This is golden. I'm just happy. So yes, no, yes, it is my line break. So yeah, so every line break for any poet should be deliberate. I'm actually quite, so Michelle, when you said that, I felt crawling on my skin, because I would have to ask for my publication. Well, if it's printed, if it's published, it's published. But I would, I would have to make a statement saying this is not. And this actually did happen to me recently with a commission, and the line breaks were changed. And I said, no, the enjambment, so the line rolling onto the other line, it's, I know if anybody was to read my poetry, of course, no one will ever read your poem exactly as you, but the breaks that you make, it can change the entire sense of movement. It can change the rhythm. Sometimes it can change the speaker, depending on what your poem is about. It can change the meaning. It can change, so many things. And I think that for me, I have to spend at least every poem, there's probably about 45 versions where I have changed the line so much to make sure that I have figured out which version I want to present to other people. And I personally like the notion of poetry that feels as though it's continuing, and that's more about the dance never ending. But that is obviously my personal opinion of what I would like my poetry to be. And I think that so when I read other poets, I try to just, even when I'm reading, I try to read aloud and be respectful of where they place their line breaks, and read it a couple of times and find out, okay, the line break is here, the full stop is here, okay, how should I read this poem? Yes, and I think what we're doing is we're showing respect to our craft. It's not just writing words on a page. I'm telling people this all the time. Poetry is not easy. It's not Instagram. Yeah, I know. I'm gonna start.
I agree with you, Safia. There are people who think, you just write something and rhyme the two ends, and that's poetry. And that really, well, I shouldn't say annoys me. People can write what they like, but poetry, as you said, is very hard work. And you do go through draft after draft after draft until you believe you've got it right. And you believe that what that poem wants to say is finally on the page. So yeah, it is hard work. It is crafting the thing. It is working at it. I remember writing a poem where, I read about my father who worked with wood. And I'm looking for it right now as I speak. But I think that is saying something about, I hadn't planned to read it, so that's why I'm not finding it right now. But it's saying something about that whole understanding of crafting the work. Okay, it is really not just a matter of just sitting and saying. Well, as you know, Michelle, I've worked with the Frank Cullimore Literary Endowment for years. I was chair there. Well, I found it 63.
Father Self.
This is what we would see every year. People just sending things in, and yes, you could identify the emotion. You could identify the emotion. That was the emotion, but there was nothing wrong with the emotion. But it was a case of, okay, well, now that you feel that way, how now are you going to actually craft this poem? Okay, and that tended to be a real problem.
So the poem you're speaking of, Esther, is that the one that's called Father Self?
That's right. Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, because I'm looking at it.
Look better than I do. Yeah, I have it right here. Yes, Father Self. Yes.
Because
Very
I
short
noticed that
poem.
like the last two lines of that poem, you've got those lines italicized. And so even when you're thinking about how do we format the text on the page, recognizing that all of these, you know, things that we might otherwise throw away as just, okay, yeah, italics, bold, whatever. And, you know, for me, it's also something that I learned having looked at Kamal Brathwaite's poetry.
Yeah.
And how important it was to lay the word on the page to make it say something beyond the word itself. And I think that's a really critical point. Well, for me, certainly in my own writing, that's something that has really helped to guide me. But I'm realizing that in a lot of poets' work, it's really very important, you know?
Yeah, I've had the honor of editing volume 4 of Kamal Brathwaite's work. Well, my dear, talk about hard work. You know, he has all these different fonts and this and that, and everything had to be precise.
Yes.
And you know, you understood it because he wanted it done. He wanted it done the way he was hearing it and the way he was seeing it. We had to respect that. But I think we need to pay attention to the crafting of the work.
But certainly when you read his work, you must hear his voice.
For sure.
So that's one of the things that comes out of it. I want to turn to a comment and a question from one of our online attendees. Says, these are two super talented poets and we're honored to hear them. Please share some tips on craft to beginning poets. How do you write so crisply and beautifully? What is your process in writing a poem?
If you want to hear my process in writing a poem, first of all, that everybody doesn't have the same process. Everybody isn't here in the same way. You know, you can teach craft in terms of how to, if you have, for example, you can teach a student perhaps how to do an extended metaphor. If you come up with an idea, you express it as a metaphor. How do you extend this metaphor all the way through? You know, you can teach meter. You can, for example, teach 2 simple meters, which are iambic and I don't remember, the other one won't come to my mind right now, it will come back. So there are certain things you can teach, but I think the challenge is how do you can't teach people how to feel. You know, you can't, you hope to impart that, but you can't teach people how to feel. But in terms of what the person is asking, once you have identified something, oh, another very important thing I want to say, you know, one of my lecturers, when I was doing my MFA, he made a very important point. He referred to this young man who wanted to write poetry. When he was asked, why do you want to write poetry? His answer was, because I have so much to say. And the lecturer said to him, that's the wrong answer. That's the wrong answer. What I really want to hear you say is, because I want to hear what the poem has to say. There's a world of difference in that. So that you don't force the thing on the page. You wait for the poem to speak to you, and it will. And then you can, it can almost suggest itself in terms of how it needs to be crafted. All right? And you can actually go buy a book and learn some of the techniques that you can use. You learn all the different figures of speech, imagery, metaphor, you learn onomatopoeia, all of those things you can do. But certainly an understanding of of sound, of sense, of how to construct that poem. And I obviously can't go into all of that now, but I wanted to get it across to that person that the crafting of the thing is important. And that's what workshops and all those kind of things can help to teach.
Safia, what about you? What about your process?
Well, I completely and wholeheartedly agree with Esther. I do not think that you should, I don't think that you should ever go into a poem, writing a poem, knowing the ending. I think you have to have a sense of adventure. Me personally, I like to have a sense of adventure. I like to enjoy poetry. I actually want to enjoy my life. I am not just a poet writing in the middle of a corner with a quill and ink, you know, depressed and lonely. I want to love my work. You know, I really do. And sometimes it is difficult, and it's you know, and it's hard. And yes, traumatic subjects come up all the time, literally, especially with what I'm writing about. But I think that having a sense of adventure and fearlessness, it there needs to be that. There needs to be some excitement. Just write. And I'll never forget, there was this whole series posted. I think it was on, you know, something on social media about how to motivate yourself and how to, you know, how to write, how to get everything on the page. And sometimes it's just find what's there. Just, you know, I think find an entry point. I was talking about this in another workshop. Everyone has an obsession, or when I say obsession, something that you are particularly interested in. Don't go for what is what might be common or popular at the moment. Find your way in and write. And I know that sounds cliche, but you have to start somewhere. I think the hardest part is beginning, and then we get into craft, and again, craft is very important, and it's discipline. So adventure, having a sense of adventure, and having a sense of discipline, and being disciplined enough to say, I don't need to put my life story on the page. Early poets always tend to do this. I did this. I used to do this as well, you know, and then I would have to sit back and think, first of all, people read millions of poems. People are going to do this to your work. They're going to turn the page. So you putting your life story on the page, how that is something for you, and not necessarily something for the work itself. Give to the art. Keep giving to the art, keep offering things to the art, but don't just, you know, put your heart on a platter and leave yourself in a terrible place, right? A lot of people start like just like Esther said, a lot of people start because they want to say something, they want to be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
But I think one of the things that I've been trying, and you know, Esther, you would know this as a teacher. One of the things that I keep telling my students is it is so important to have critique of your work. You know, especially if you're talking about being a writer. Yeah, you're writing and the work, you know, it feels good. It's a passionate topic that you have. You feel a lot of emotion attached to it, and you believe that it's the best possible work. And I think that's one of the reasons why, not that I'm very old, but in my younger years, when I first started going to poetry slams in Trinidad, the UK, and then here, I kind of stopped because I felt as though when you go to the poetry slam, and I don't know if this happens anymore, to be honest, because I haven't been in years, but you kind of felt as though everybody just kind of claps and says, yes, good job.
Seriously.
And there's
That's
no
exactly right.
Absolutely.
The critique.
You're absolutely right
helps
about
you to
that,
grow.
Michelle.
Absolutely.
You're absolutely right about that, Michelle, because, and that's why I prefer people not to come, you know, out of the blue, could you tell me about this? Because very often people just want you to say, oh, that's marvelous. They don't really want you to critique the thing honestly.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that because I think I have a right. I still send some pieces from time to time to people like Eddie Ball, Mervyn Morris, Kwame Dawes, from time to time, because, and they might, you know, and they might stand back and say, oh yeah, that's fine, but I think perhaps you could look at that line again, because you must never think you were right, because sometimes you're so close to it that there's something that you're probably not picking up. Something else I wanted to talk about as well, Michelle. Safia mentioned, I think she did, but this idea of, oh, I wanted to say that poetry is really all around us. And it's really interesting the way how you can find a situation that probably somebody else would overlook, but it resonates with you and you know that you have a poem. I want to read one here called Lady St. Lawrence. Lady St. Lawrence, I just have the page and I'll find it in a minute. But I think that I wonder if some people see, yes, 56. some people who I don't know if you've ever seen her, Michelle, but there's a woman who walks along the street in along Maxwell.
Mhm.
She is
Yeah.
appears to be homeless.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know her, yeah. And what fascinates me about her is that she walks with a kind of a little dance in there.
Mm.
I don't know if
She
you've ever
does.
noticed, but
She
she has a
does.
kind of a little.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen her? I've
Yeah.
discovered her name, which I probably shouldn't mention now. But I wrote a poem about her because something about that fascinated me. How do you walk in your normal life? Well, she has something, she's clearly not, completely in her right senses. But somehow she has managed to capture something that looks like a dance in the way that she walks. So I call this one Lady St. Lawrence. And I have two small epigrams, I think. Yes, that's what you call them. Today it's called Lady St. Lawrence, out of deference to this lady. And I have two epigrams. Today I felt pass over me a breath of wind from the wings of madness. That's Charles Baudelaire. And then dance is a song of the body, either of joy or pain.
Mhm.
This is the poem. Finely drawn limbs, the color of night, of 4-day morning. Some song pours through her, every movement a dance only her body remembers. Perhaps she caught some chords deep in her belly long ago. Her first lover, some siren spirit from staring too long at the sea. Some days her scarves, head ties are almost matching, as if her music sleeps a while, so that she moves, however slowly, back to a world where color, shape, and light coordinate. But then it comes, her eyes turned inward, her body once again attentive to a rhythm honed in unknown places. She journeys in half-light basket on arm to byways and hedges seared by drought. There she seeks the lost, the abandoned, fragments crusted in mud, stained by mildew, twisted, cracked, and torn. Let her be. She gathers our discarded lives, grief-tainted, grace outworn. Meanwhile, some song pours through her, every movement a dance only her body remembers.
That is the perfect
Wonderful.
picture of that. I know her, you know,
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
and I see her. The imagery is there, you know, even the use of the tonality is all there. And if you don't know this woman, I'm sure that right now you can see her. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the poetry that both of you write. You know,
And you know,
Safi,
Michelle, I
Mhm.
wish that I were able to say to her, I've written this poem for you. You know,
Mm.
people see her, she's just a stray woman
Yeah.
just walking up and down the road and she's not in her right mind. And and I wish I could tell her and that she could
Yeah.
really appreciate that somebody took the time to write a poem for her, to memorialize her in a poem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've discovered her
Absolutely.
name since then, but I know that she's not, probably going to be able to respond to what it is I'm trying to tell.
Absolutely. Sophia, do you want to respond to that? Do you have any similar types of work that you'd like to share?
Yes, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for that reading. I love the notion of memorializing
Yeah.
people who might be just possibly ignored, forgotten, no one knows their names, so that's very important to me. Yes, my recent, those of you who might have been at my recent workshop, I was encouraging people to know who would we like to see a statue of, who made us smile, you know, what about you know, the postman, or the people who we just really love to speak to. Yeah, so yes, I thank you. I feel very blessed and humbled.
So welcome, Sophia.
Thank you. I think this poem, okay, we're getting political. Okay. Okay. So this it has to be, so this this poem I wrote recently. This is there's several poems I've written recently since being back in Barbados, and this one I was inspired by a trip to Freedom Park, and I thought about who I just wanted to, again, much like Esther's story, who I wanted to write about. I'm going to let the poem speak for itself and we can speak about it after, but yes, I think this kind of embodies how I'm feeling right now. A man with his clothes in bin bags lies on a bench in the stickiest part of Bridgetown, sucking his gums. He removed his teeth so lies would be easier to swallow. His grand gave birth to every version of Barbados but herself. He can still hear her voice. It rolled like a wave. Even before it finished, it would start again. He always wanted to buy her a new hat so she could have some control over the sun. Ahead of me, a man tries to hide the sun in his back pocket in case he needs to fly. He bruises like sour salt, and the burns on his hands are as loud as the car horns. Like many Bajans, he is a natural-born fisherman for ambition. He dives in the city, trading sweet ice for blue notes, and on the weekends, he fixes cars and drinks beers by them. His grand was a church-going woman who didn't like too many sweet things. It seemed like cane, rum, and everything in between was enough. Do you remember when prayer sufficed and shovels were enough to make peace with ourselves, or souls behaved like millipedes making bridges with our bodies? We recognized everyone we knew and didn't just because they existed. Our muscles are not hammocks. Though we make the hustle look easy, our temperaments are scrubbed like juking boards. A young boy ran to a wall, stared like his kneecaps were reading a dictionary, asked his grand where his name was, and she said, feel each part of the wall, study each groove, each field, each pothole, and our name will be the one who says good morning, who offers directions like their tongue were a broom on a veranda, who once gave you a lift when they were low on gas, but the night was a hunting dog, who brushed disdain from your collarbone, who taught you to laugh until your dimples recognized themselves in the curves of plantain. And when the boy and his grand found their family and themselves in every single brick, they stopped at one with no mark, pressed their palms and gave the brick to the invisible, who will one day become themselves.
I love, there's so many lines in there, you know, that I really like. And I like that bit where he removes his teeth so the lies would be easier to swallow. So there's something so sad about that, you know, so sad about this situation in which he finds himself, and he has to swallow whatever, like he has to swallow whatever he can find to swallow for survival. And sadly, so many of them are lies, and he knows they are, but there's nothing he can do about it. It's written with a lot of sensitivity, and I really like the poem very much.
I have a question for both of you. Having listened to you reading your own work, have you ever had that experience where someone else reads your work and you're kind of responding like, it's not quite what I intended?
That happens invariably, Michelle. I mean, you know, they pause maybe at the wrong place or something of the kind. But sometimes some people do a pretty good job of it. And you actually hear some echoes that you hadn't probably heard before, hadn't paid attention to. So yes, but I tend to get a little bit itchy when somebody is about to read my work because I'm thinking, are they really going to read that thing the way they should? You know, but you know, that's the thing. Once you put your work out there, there's precious little that you can, there's no control you have over how people are going to perceive it, how they're going to interpret, how they're going to read it. That is why you have to pay so much attention, in my view, to how that thing is crafted and what it actually, what's the end result before you put it up there.
Sophia, what about you? Have you had that experience, that moment of gasp?
Yes, a few times, but I like to hear other readings of my work, and some, you know what, I'm saying other people, I gasp when I hear myself, and I think, why did I do that line? What is this? Like, what is this line? So yeah, for me it's just constant editing, and I don't necessarily believe that any one of my poems is, I mean, I haven't actually, I'm still editing, writing my first collection, but poems being complete, I like the idea of things changing all the time. And I also recognize that accents, dialects, everybody has their own tone, their own way of speaking, even England alone, London alone, Barbados, which everyone has their own way of speaking. So I know that it will never sound exactly how I envisioned it in my head. And sometimes there's been one time when I actually preferred a reading of my work because they paused in several different places, and I thought, oh yeah, I meant to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, one of my lecturers, he would always say, a poem is never finished, only abandoned. Okay? Because I have certainly looked at some of my published work and I have said, something, I think I would have preferred if I said, putting that word there and that word there. But I know I've worked I've worked hard on it, and I have to be satisfied with the way it is. But yes, I've looked at, said, yeah, I could really have put that word there or that word there. But so it's always it's an ongoing thing. But that is the way of art, I think, the constant, change and shifting. But we do finally put something there that we are reasonably happy with by the time it goes out.
I don't know if we're ever entirely happy with it.
Well, you remember I said reasonably.
Reasonably. My dad has been writing poetry since when, Esther, like 60s, 70s?
You're trying to date me now, Michelle. That's
no,
perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine.
But I up to last week, he's still sending me anthologies of work that he wrote back then. Yeah. And he's going back to it and constantly rewriting, and just recognizing that even as our lived experiences are changing, you might go back to a poem and think, okay, let me kind of change this as well to reflect what perhaps is happening now, or do a part 2 of it or what have you. So it's constantly evolving, the work that we do as writers. And I think that's a part of the beauty of it, because you can see the stages. You can see, okay, I wrote this work 10 years ago. What's it like today?
Right.
I think that's really quite beautiful to watch that kind of progress.
Yeah, and I think that you leave the work as it is, and then you go on, because that is kind of a gauge of your development, as you move on.
We have a comment as well from Dr. Yvonne Weeks, who incidentally was my very first theater arts teacher. Welcome, Yvonne. Yvonne says that she was recently asked to submit a poem for an anthology, and she used the opportunity to make changes. She was asking if you find yourself doing that as well when you're submitting work for, upcoming projects, if that's an opportunity for you to perhaps edit what you would have written before.
I think that is allowed. I think of one such incident. I'm trying my best to remember whether I'm trying to remember if I did in fact change it or if I just let it go ahead. But that temptation will always be there. I suppose you could check with your publisher to see, I don't know what that final, what that publisher would say about the fact that changing it. I don't know that there's anything that they can do about that. It's your work, you have the copyright. So if you wanted to, put forward another version of it, I guess you could do that. I suppose you could.
Yes, I think for myself, if my work is accepted in a journal or any type of publication, I'm actually an editor's worst nightmare. I will come back with another version if it's accepted, and if it can't be changed, then that's okay, because I'm actually constantly editing. And I've developed a bit of a reputation for this, for being a bit of a nightmare. My publishers are very, very kind and patient with me. But I think until it goes to the book itself, the finished product, I think people can expect various changes to happen. So many times I've seen in fantastic poetry collections, versions of this poem have been featured, you know, in poetry magazine, in this magazine, rather than the actual poem. So yes, and sometimes it will be something as slight as a comma. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I will come back and I will say, actually, no, I want this comma to be changed here. This word has to be this word, and a poem that I was planning on reading, the same thing happened. A publisher took it, and I said, okay, you know what? I've changed the body part. You know, I just need you to make these changes. And you know, some people are very kind. Yeah.
Some people are perhaps a little less forgiving. We've published it already.
Yeah.
You know, but and I think that's something that I'm learning as well. Actually, Yvonne invited me to publish some of my stories this year in an anthology called Voices. It's a collection of stories and monologues for Caribbean actors. And just kind of having that chance to go back to the monologue, because I'll be honest, Esther, I'm one of those people that tends to forget. So I put that last full stop and I go, okay, that's done. So the chance to kind of just go back to it and say, oh, wait, hold on. And actually to get Yvonne's comments and the editor's comments, and yeah, I can make a change here, and you can edit it, and then you see how the work evolves and improves over time. And I think a part of my own challenge is that I've never really seen myself as a serious writer. So I'm now kind of learning these little nuances that help you to improve your craft. And we have a comment from Anne Harding on Facebook. She says, no piece of writing is ever finished. We just pick points at which to pause and let it be. I like that, pause and let it be.
That's right.
Yeah.
You have to, because otherwise the thing will just haunt you forever. So you have to come to that point where it's okay, well, okay, that's it now. But sometimes you're almost afraid to pick the thing back up again. Oh my goodness. Not that anything is wrong with it. It's just that you're seeing things that you probably think you could make better.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges I have with writing generally is that I write very much in response to a moment or a time, or you know, what is happening. So for instance, right now, I've been focusing a lot on doing poetry that's a reflection of what's happening with us, with the pandemic, the ashfall, the hurricane. And I'm almost afraid that if I pick that up after, because I'm not in that moment anymore and I don't have that necessarily that kind of emotional connection, do I lose or do I gain by distancing myself from it? I'm not sure if there's an answer to that question, but I don't
Michelle,
know. What are your thoughts?
Remember, Michelle, that we never really write for ourselves. You know, there is somebody, even though you are distant or you may feel distant from it, somebody is going to pick it up and connect with it right away, because they are maybe on that same day reliving that moment that you believe you've passed on from. So that's a beautiful thing. There's always that no essence to a poem, which is not now for you anymore, but you can be very sure, because it's all part of the human experience. We never write really for ourselves, and we never write only about our own experiences. Somebody else is experiencing that, has experienced it, will experience it. So you can always have that reassurance that it's going to connect with someone, if it is a genuine piece of work, and if it is, you know, crafted well.
Yes, that is beautiful. So Safia, you know, kind of just moving, not really moving away from that point, but going further in depth into it. What is our role then as poets in the society? We're not writing for ourselves, as you've both said repeatedly in this conversation. It's not for us. What is our role? Is it that we are nation builders? Are we historians? Are we just trying to kind of capture a picture of what's happening at a particular time? What is it that we're really contributing significantly on a social level or a national level, international level?
So the notion of a poet being a historian, I think, although we are writing about moments in history, we are not necessarily providing fact after fact after fact after fact. We are providing a feeling. And that's something quite unique in itself. I think that we provide a sense of empathy. I constantly am trying to explain to people the difference between a journal or journalism. So journalism, a journal, a bio entry, and a poem. And I do believe that there is a difference. Yes, there are forms which might look like a journal entry, but at the same time in poetry, and I use this example so often, an apple can eat a person. If it is about hunger, we can swap things around. It is a creative practice. So the notion of empathy, and I think during the pandemic, poetry helped provoke people to appreciate the world around us. And I know that's something that was happening naturally anyway, but poetry, someone once told me that poetry acted as a sort of guardian angel, you know, but I have a problem with that, because I don't like the connotations of poets, you know, playing a role which is always nice, you know, showing, you know, having this this perfect connection with the world. We do not have a perfect connection with the world, and I think that there is. So yes, so back to this notion of journalism. Yes, there is an essence of truth in poetry as well, but also that we go to places that a lot of people are afraid to maybe delve themselves. I think people during the pandemic were very scared. They were fearful. They were petrified even of spending that much time with themselves. And this is something that poets are, you know, are constantly doing. They're constantly ruminating on the world around us. So being able to provide that bridge is important. I think being able to show different perspectives is important. And sometimes poets have the you know, the unfortunate job of, not unfortunate, I think it's a blessing being able to show the ugliness, the sadness, the things that we deliberately want to paint over. So, you know, and again, like, you know, the poem I wrote, or the poems I'm writing, they're not necessarily patriotic poems. That is not to say, I had to have this conversation. It's not to say that, no, I am not saying I'm any less of a Bayesian because I am writing poems which are not patriotic, or I'm not for the Republic. It's just to say that if I see fireworks, but I also see a woman who is struggling to pay her bills, who's worried about, you know, who's going to look after her child, I cannot ignore that. That's not, you know, yeah, poets on let me not make that comment, but yes, okay. I will not get into trouble. I get deported from this island. Thank you. I will continue. Okay, I am done.
But I think I understand what you're saying though, Safia, because we are not here to paint a pretty picture all the time. It's you know, if we go back to the old argument that art reflects life, reflects art. Mm-hmm. And not everything in art necessarily is going to be the pretty picture, you know, and so we do have to be able to be truthful to ourselves and also to what we're representing in our work. You know, I know that was at your book, Esther, which one was it? Witness in Stone. Yeah. You know, that's one of the things that's on the cover, the back cover. You're referred to as a poet who could speak truth and could challenge and console her nation and all of us. And I think that's a critical point to note as well. You know.
Yes, I think it's so important. Yes, because that's the poet. The poet is meant to be, or has been described as, the mirror. You know, that shows us who we are. And yes, poetry can have its beauty, and I would never deny that. But it must also be it must also reflect back to us the naked truth of who we are, where we are, because ultimately poetry is not meant just to communicate in terms of ordinary language. It is meant to intensify experience and to help us to enter that space where whatever it is we're going through becomes so we see it in living color, we see it in high definition, so to speak. This is the poet's role. So I see we have some difficulties in our Barbadian society, like all other societies. I'm particularly concerned about, the young men, the violence. I'm doing some writing on that. These are things that we can use poetry to show, and hopefully, if we can capture it in images that are strong and powerful enough, because people tend to see things, people are very visual generally, then that's the poet's role, I think, not just to present us with beauty, but to present us with some very ugly truths that the politicians probably not going to tell us, and the sociologists are going to talk about it, and they're going to probably give us the facts and the figures and all that. The poet is the one who enters into that space of feeling and depth of emotion to connect us with who we are and what we need to look at.
Absolutely. Safia, you had mentioned before that you wrote something in response to where we are now in terms of the Republic. Would you like to share it with us? Lala's here saying, get into trouble, man. We're cheering you on to get into that trouble.
Yes, I think that was actually the poem I shared before regarding the several characters
that you saw. Okay.
Yeah, regarding, Freedom Park and the difficulty in basically, yes, in seeing very different sides of Barbados. And there was also, of course, a camera crew there, and they were only focusing on one particular aspect of Barbados, which is which we know would happen already, but of course it was a little heartbreaking, I think, especially as it was so soon after we became a republic. So it was quite heartbreaking for me personally. Yes, I do have a section of a bigger poem, which is, because it is not yet published, I can't, it will probably take 20 minutes to read it. It is a sonnet sequence, but there was one verse or stanza I can share, and it is also the entire poem is created from choreographies that I have seen throughout history, that I've been trying to find throughout history of so what my collection, let me just talk about my collection now. What my collection is about, I am reading texts from overseers and slave traders and just colonial texts from as far back as the 1500s. And I'm looking at the movements performed by Barbadian people, especially Barbadian women, or enslaved people who were taken to Barbados. And then throughout time, I'm trying to locate where these other movements might have happened, and I'm creating stories, recreating narratives, translations, doing some sort of interdisciplinary work, which is what I do. And so this particular poem spans across literally 400 years, from the 1500s all the way up to 1998, and various different women in history. So this one has a theme on the Republic and takes place between a riot and carnival. This is a section of the poem. Breadfruit and bottoms catching a fever past midnight. It is contagious, but those who are immune still lock their doors. 97. A city prepares for a relentless troop whose birthright is shuffling to music which uses some form of beating skin. Death is not a maritime man in a canoe with a lantern. Death is an ebony tide playing the fool until massa turn around. A woman leads, carrying a flag, who becomes a cannibal once a year. The longer she waves it, the more likely it will devour her. She spins, bedazzled in rum. The flag recognizes the smeller energy. It clasps her from the front and feasts. A procession will go to war for a symbol and never dare to ask how broken it is. The flag becomes a hypnotizer in the wind. Have you ever noticed the way it undulates like a woman's tummy? So that's part of a thing.
The imagery of, have you ever noticed how it undulates like a woman's tummy alone? there's something about the way we string the words together in poetry that just gives you a different perspective on things. It makes you see things differently, you know, see things in ways that you probably never would have thought of before, make connections between things. And I'm hearing that coming out of the poetry that both of you are reading this afternoon.
I wanted to read this. Well, this will be my final poem, I believe. When Safia talked about women and the matter of enslavement all these years, this hasn't been published yet. It's a very recent one. And this is one, I'm trying a new technique here, where I leave blanks, but the reader knows that he or she is meant to fill in those blanks. This one is called, My Ancestors Gifted Me Their Silence. Because I am now very concerned about what was that silence about. Okay. So this is the voice of a woman now speaking from the grave. Let her walk free, unhindered into the new world. Sorry, let me just say something. This is in response to that very first poem I read with this little girl who's walking to get the milk. And she's all taken up, she's very innocent and all taken up with the beauties of nature. This is I'm now responding to that poem, or I should say reacting to that poem. All right, so it's a very different view altogether. Shh. Let her walk free, unhindered into the new world. She must not see the crimson dawn and think of. Let her see only purple flowers growing in the cut rock, not hear the back breaking. She must remember only the smell of ripe plums and guavas rising from the gully, never the stink of. Let her gaze at the lacy leaves in the cluster of bamboo trees and not see that the branches were cut, stripped, and used for. The thick pole with holes cut into the crossbars was where they. The dark spot left by jamun berries was once the stain of. Shh. She's walking west of the big house next to the nigger yard she knows only as the yard. We were barely her age when Master summoned us to his quarters. We were not the same when we came back. The children born to us were never ours to love as we wanted. Master could treat them with such cruelty, sell them when he chose to. Better some had never seen the morning light. Better they'd been buried along with their navel strings under this same earth. But this girl, walking, she's one our brave saw when we gathered in the late evenings, speaking over a pot of water so no one could hear us. It was then the old wise woman whispered her vision that one day, shh, let the girl child think it's only birds, crickets, grasshoppers, the wind slipping through the cuscus that she hears. Never the sounds of her. Shh. Oh, my ancestors, so late for me to unwrap layer by layer this gift of your silence. But today I placed my birth call over my eyes so I may see. And I weep for the bones I find here, the solitary cowrie shell, a broken comb, shreds of the Osnaburg that roughened your once smooth ebony skin, gave no ease to your torn flesh. I shed these tears for my oblivion, false buffer of empire that shrouded my hearing, veiled my sight, turned me, bastard child, away from my true mother. Now I unwrap the love you forced into silence, like a hedge to protect me, until the time would come for safer passage. What can I give you in return in these late years, this late awakening? the pledge of my voice, my words, the rest of this walking.
You know, it's amazing how you can make some of the heaviest topics, you know, you show the beauty through the word, you know. Well, I'm actually speechless with that one, Esther. There's so much in there, and just kind of from a theater perspective, imagining those moments of silence, those breaks, the idea of put what you want in this space.
Exactly, exactly. And very often what people put in is probably harsher or worse than I could. That's the thing about it.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And it really does kind of bring home the question of form and structure in poetry, and help us to realize that, yes, as you were saying, Esther, you can go, you can study the different ways of writing, but you can also find your own voice, your own expression, and bring that to life on the page. You know, I think that is really quite, I'm sorry, my head is racing ahead from the performance perspective of it.
It is a performance. It is a performance.
You know, I'm just like, okay, who can I cast to do that one? I can see it. So my head is racing right now with that. That is a beautiful piece.
Thank you very
and
much.
it is so full. I think the voids in it are full of potential for interpretation and performance. You know, I can see the dance in that as well, Safia. You know, you can see it. It's really quite a nice piece.
Thank you very much. It took a lot to write it, for sure. It took so much out of me to write that. So much, you know.
It is draining to write sometimes, isn't it?
Of course, sometimes I can feel myself literally stretching. And I just have to get up and walk away from it, and then come back at another time, you know. But that's why I'm saying it's hard work, but it is something so tremendous. I am so humbly grateful for the gift of poetry. You know, it is hard. It is really. I'm just thankful.
Yeah.
Deeply thankful.
You know, I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation continuing beyond even this event. I think it's really important for us to continue to have these conversations between those who have been doing this for years and those who are perhaps now starting, those who started before those of us who are now starting, but to have these conversations and these times of sharing, because there is so much to learn. And I suppose I could speak for everybody on the call, but I certainly am quite enlightened to hear more about your thought process, both of your thought processes, what goes into it. And, you know, Safia, once upon a time, long ago, you said to us, be a dancer too, right? And I've honestly not thought about the dance on the page. And I really am fascinated by the concept of even using dance notation as a way of writing poetry. You know, I think that is a beautiful way in.
It's a very it's a very new, I mean, it's never been done before, so I will be the first person to do it, so I'm really excited. It's all rooted in Barbados. It's for Barbados. It is about Barbadian people, and I think that is one thing that I'm just so proud of, to be able to share our culture through that. And yes, just to say about Esther's last piece, it was so powerful and profound, and I think that feeling of being able to really take the environment, this scene that is quite haunting and devastating, into a new place, and it's something that I'm constantly thinking about. The work that I'm writing, finding dance is one way to find out. I think my last poem is it goes to another place as well. I think it was also a method of survival, because I think I was finding it quite, honestly, if I'm gonna, I was traumatized. Slavery is so much worse than people think it is. There were things worse than rape, worse than death, I was traumatized. So I'm constantly trying to find ways out, so I'm not having panic sweats and, at night. So being able to write is most certainly a blessing. So yes.
Well, we have some final comments coming in from our Zoom guest, from Prof. Nigel. I believe our silence has been too long and you just breathed life into it. Thank you so much. Yvonne says, thank you so much. Have a good evening and be safe, everyone. And from Inez Seeley, congratulations to both poets. I concur with both. I hope to be able to exchange ideas with you. And I think that's a beautiful space where we can kind of bring this conversation to a close. It has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to be sharing this space with both of you. Safia, I know we have lots more to talk about. We are gonna have lots to talk about moving forward. I wanna hear so much more about the project that you're working on as well. And Esther, we're here.
Of course, yeah, sure, of course.
We're here.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. I just
yeah.
want to say thank you so much to the museum, Barbados Museum, to Harriet for sure, who continues her love of literature and her promotion. And thank you, wonderful host, and beautiful smile, by the way.
Thank you.
And thank you. And thank you so much, Safia. It's been really a pleasure meeting with you and chatting about your work. And I am fascinated with by the concept of the dance and how you interweave that into poetry. So thank you so much for the evening, the afternoon.
Yes, and definitely sending out major thanks to the Barbados Museum and Historical Society for facilitating not just today, but the series of workshops with Safia as well. Safia, sorry. It really has been an engaging time. I don't know if anyone from the museum wants to come on to close off the overall workshop poetry series.
Thank you, Michelle. That was fascinating. It brought our three-part series to a wonderful end. Our work with Safia continues. Sorry. I think it was muted for a while, so I'll just repeat. Okay. Yes, as I said before, this evening has really brought the three-part series to a wonderful end. Our work with Safia will continue. It actually started before the three-part series and it will continue. We are kind of the historians on call for her new collection. So that work will continue. And we hope to do some work also with Esther. So thank you, the panel. Thank you, Michelle, for moderating so beautifully. And I also want to thank the persons who were with us, both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. And I want to remind persons that Safia has offered to critique the poems that came out of the workshop and the masterclass exercises. So send those to me at library@barbnews.org.bb. Let me try to type that in and I will forward them to Safia and we will see how we can use that as a platform to continue this interaction. So thanks again, panel, moderator, and thank you all and be safe. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.